Hello, our story today is Matthew 16:13-19, and Mark 8:27-30, Upon the Solid Rock. The disciples were unusually quiet on this beautiful, clear morning. The Roman road beneath their sandals eased their traveling, and the scenery that stretched in every direction was verdant and beautiful. Fig trees laden with honeyed fruit grew tall and broad. Mighty sycamores, their trunks draped with lush vines, shaded the path. Nearby, oleander and wild roses flanked the banks of the rushing stream. The cool morning air was sweetly perfumed with honeysuckle. This was the land of God's bounteous promise to Israel. The soil had been made abundantly fertile by steady rain and ancient organic eruptions. It was the land of fruit, oil, and honey, golden with wheat, leaping with fat lambs, and flowing with the richest wine. This was the ancient Bashan, picture of God's richest blessing, an illustration of his most fervent warning. In his last address to the Israelites, Moses had prophesied that despite God's generosity, his children would turn from him, rejecting the rock. Jeshurun grew fat and kicked. Filled with food, they became very sleek. They abandoned the God who made them and rejected the rock of their Savior. Deuteronomy 32:15. Now Moses' words of warning rang in the disciples' hearts and mind as each step they took carried them farther and farther away from observant Judaism and into the land where no upright Jewish man would venture. This region was such an antithesis of all that the Jews deemed right and good that it had earned the moniker of the other side. It was not only on the other side of the Sea of Galilee geographically from the disciples' home, but it was the other side socially, religiously, and morally from Jewish ideal. The disciples were following Jesus deep into enemy territory where the law had been lost, swallowed whole by Hellenism. Here the worship of the one true God had been exchanged for gods of wood and stone. Bashan did, indeed, forget the God who had so richly blessed her. She was now Caesarea Philippi, and her heart was pulsed with idolatry. At a sharp turn in the road, the city was suddenly before them, nestled at the base of a massive Mount Hermon. Jesus motioned to a quiet spot beneath an outcropping of trees, where, in the view of the city, he would teach his disciples. And these men grew even more sober as they stared at the scene before them. There, on the side of the mountain, was an elaborate worship site towering over Caesarea Philippi on an almost 300-foot natural terrace. The western end of the terrace was anchored by an awning cave revered as the grotto of the god Pan since the arrival of the Greeks. Shepherds had long come to this site to worship their patron god, both in the grotto and in the spring at the base. Herod the Great, however, had taken idolatrous worship at the site to a new level. Now a gleaming white columned temple toward the front of the cavern. It was known as the Temple of Zeus, built in honor of Herod's patron, Caesar Augustus. The majestic temple was built without a rock wall, so the worshippers could directly enter the sacred grotto. There were gates of Hades, believed to be the entrance to the underworld. The cave at the rear contained a still and unfathomably deep pool where unfortunate souls may have been thrown as sacrifices to the gods of the underworld. Jesus turned to his disciples. "Who do the people say that I am?" The answers rang out. "John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah, or one of the prophets." These were the answers of the masses, of those who had come to hear Jesus speak and witness his miracles. But what about these men with him now, who had walked with him and lived alongside him for so long? Their time together was growing short. Had they not yet grown enough to discover the truth? "But what about you?" Jesus asked them. "Who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter's voice rang out sure and clear. "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it." Jesus had changed Simon's name to Peter, the rock. Now his very name would remind the disciples not only of that place, but also of the day when their master pointed them back to their history and prepared them for their future. Just as God, the rock, brought Israel Bashan and blessed her, only to suffer her rejection, so Jesus had come to redeem his people. He would suffer great rejection in the days ahead. Oh, how the disciples would need to be reminded of the unwavering faithfulness of God, their rock, in the days to come. From Caesarea Philippi, they would turn to Jerusalem. The time had come for Jesus to fulfill his ultimate destiny as Redeemer of all mankind by surrendering himself to the unspeakable brutality of a Roman cross. What horrors the disciples would witness, how their hopes and dreams would be devastated, and Peter also would bear the terrible crushing guilt of betraying his Lord. But Jesus, in his great mercy, had launched a preemptive strike of hope by changing his beloved disciples' very name into a reminder of God's goodness, strength, and deliverance. The lesson was over. The seed of hope had been planted, and the Messianic declaration delivered. It was time to head back home. It was time for Jesus to begin his last stage of his journey to the cross. My rock, you are forever faithful, and help me to remember that though the forces of evil rage in these last days, the ultimate victory is already won. Grant me the grace to live courageously in this truth and to remember that no matter how dark the moments before me seem, you, the light of this world, the light of truth and hope, of power and goodness, have promised to prevail. Thank you for listening, and have a nice day.